we see John outside of the frame of the illustration and kind of peeking in through a hole. The angel takes the form of an eagle here and tells John that this is the fourth horseman. The first horseman wasn't too scary, but by the time we get to the fourth one, they're pretty terrifying. So here we have a horse and his rider, who carries, if you will, a bowl or a chalice full of fire. He emerges from, this is a hellmouth. You might have heard of hellmouths if you like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. But this is, in the Middle Ages, just as we saw in the Last Judgment Tympanum at Saint Lazare, literally hell is the mouth of a terrible beast with lots of eyes and lots of mouths. And there are flames emerging. There's a little devil here who's kind of boiling people alive. And if we look at some of in detail at those who reside in hell, they include a bishop and other people. Because in the 13th century, one of the great concerns was that wayward priests or wayward bishops who were corrupt would lead people astray. So, and that's something that the commentary references in this particular book. So we've got some of these images and images of these groups who were thought to be causing lots of evil within the spaces of hell in this book. Okay. So we're not showing you all the illustrations here. There are 76 apocalypse illustrations and then about another 76 commentary illustrations, but we're just giving you the highlights. What we see here in this next image is there is a pit of the abyss, and this structure represents the pit of the abyss. The pit of the abyss is unlocked. Here we see a key, and we see an angel who has blown a trumpet. There are 7 angels with 7 trumpets in the book of Revelation, and each time a trumpet is blown, something really terrible happens. And at this particular trumpet, the locust beasts rise out of the pit of the abyss, and with them is their leader Abaddon, which is a name for the devil or Satan, and they trample the people of God. And so that's what we see. We've got this locust beast that has a human head and looks quite a lot like a horse with a serpent tail, trampling good people, and he's led by a king who wears a crown, but who also wears this Jewish hat. In the Apocalypse text, it doesn't talk about Abaddon being a Jew, but the commentary text certainly infers that, and the illustration here takes it one step further. So we have here the devil represented as a kind of king of the Jews, and he's extra evil because he's got these terrible bat-like wings. And so this is all part of John's kind of bizarre tour through heaven, where he gets to see both terrible things that happen on earth and things that happen in real life. The next illustration that we're looking at is, I believe, a commentary illustration where we once more see Abaddon seated and with his legs crossed, showing that he's a king or somebody in a power of authority, still with a crown and the Jewish hat on, but his henchmen, and he's now got people kneeling to him, so he's kind of set himself up as a false prophet or as an antichrist, which is a theme of the commentary. And he is ordering the deaths of the 2 witnesses. So in the book of Revelation, there's a story where there are 2 witnesses, and they are killed in the holy city, and their bodies are left for 3 days, and they're killed by the bad guys, by like the enemies of God. And so this is, if you will, the text illustration, but this is the commentary illustration. So we have within one image this sense of what is actually happening in the apocalyptic text, and then how the way in which the commentary interprets these enemies of God and the leader of the locust beasts as Antichrist, who sits in judgment and orders the death of the 2 witnesses. And so clearly we can see what a bad guy he is. Throughout this book, we have a lot of very fancy pen flourishes. These are effectively fancy doodles to help decorate the page. Gothic art is about narrative and storytelling, and I think that we can see that here. And drama, we've got lots of dramatic action, as this particular witness is both being run through with spears and about to have his head hacked off by this evil-looking figure. But we also have a sense of the need for decoration. A lot of these pages have gold in them. We see lots of gold leaf. We also see lots of decorative borders, and then lots of additional figures that just help to create this sense of decoration and an additional sense of decoration. And, if you've heard the design idea that maybe less is more, which is a fairly modern idea, in the Gothic period, we would really say that more is more. More decoration is always better. Okay. Then in the next illustration, we have an image of the dragon. This is a dragon with 7 heads, chasing the woman in the sun, who then has to hide her child in heaven. And here the woman is interpreted as Mary, who's often shown in a fairly similar way at the Nativity. She hides her child, who is identified as Jesus with the cruciform halo, and she hides him in heaven. And then elsewhere in this image, we see the altar in heaven, or the space of heaven, which is represented as a Gothic cathedral. You can imagine that if you saw lots of images in books of the space of heaven as being represented as a Gothic cathedral, that in actually entering a Gothic cathedral or a Gothic church that is decorated in this way, that you would associate that with the space of heaven. And so there are ways in which this book reaches out to the real world of the later Middle Ages to try and incorporate its symbolism in meaningful and persuasive ways. Okay, this is one of my favorite illustrations from this particular book. Later on in the book of Revelation, John and the angel encounter the whore of Babylon, who sits on the beast with 7 heads. So the dragon with 7 heads has a friend, the beast with 7 heads. And the whore of Babylon, who is a personification of an evil city and really of just evil generally. We've got like the good woman, who's the woman in the sun of the previous illustration, and here's the bad woman of the apocalypse, the whore of Babylon. And she is tempting John with her wares and with her body. And here the angel is kind of showing John in this very awkward position, the whore of Babylon, and John is terrified. And so the angel kind of takes him by the hand and forcefully shows John what is happening. And that's all part of the drama of these scenes. It's not just that we get to see the whore of Babylon, but through John and through the representation of John, we get to see how we're supposed to respond to these scenes. And John responds not always as a holy man, but as a person, and that's part of what art of the Middle Ages and the later Middle Ages is trying to do. It's to humanize divine figures, and Saint John would certainly be one of those. In other versions, there are about 50 illustrated apocalypse manuscripts that survive from this kind of Gothic period in England. And so this is just one example. All the images we're showing you today are from one book, but there are about 49 other books. And in some of these, John is really tempted sexually by the whore of Babylon and is really attracted by her. And in other versions, he's so terrified of the whore of Babylon that literally he jumps into the arms of the angel. And so we get lots of very human responses from John. He's either horrified and terrified, or he's enticed by the whore of Babylon. It's all very human in its conception of some of these figures, which I think is very different from what we saw from early medieval art. Later on in the story, the whore of Babylon burns. So literally the city of Babylon and the personification of the city of Babylon, they burn, and then everybody in heaven rejoices that this enemy has been defeated. And so periodically within the story of the book of Revelation, we see these terrible things that happen on earth, with Abaddon climbing out of the abyss. But then we also, in the following illustration, get a scene of what's going on in heaven, with the court of heaven, where we often have an image of Christ enthroned, with angels and the 4 apocalyptic beasts, together with the 24 elders who accompany God in heaven. And so John is just very astounded by all of this as he kind of leans back on this hill. He sees what's happening, but he takes his cues from what's going on in heaven, and we see all these people blowing these different trumpets as things begin to come to a close. We can also see the decorative elements that make up Gothic art. More of these pen flourishes. You notice that this little P that begins this paragraph